Hey, hello, everyone. It's Mayor Cam Guthrie here, and today I have a very special guest with me. Good old Twitter, bringing us politicians together, all the way from Berkeley, California.
That's right.
We have Lori, and how do you pronounce your last name? Is it Droste?
Droste.
Droste. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. All right. Well, at least I asked up front, so that's good. Lori, thank you so much for joining me. I really wanted to reach out to you because I was inspired about what you're accomplishing there. As Now, are you a deputy mayor? Is that right?
So right now I am the vice mayor of
Vice
the
mayor.
city
Okay.
of Berkeley, and I'm a council member representing the southeast portion of Berkeley.
Okay. And I think on your website, and why don't you hit everybody right now with your website? It's your name
Oh yeah,
dot com.
LoriDroste.com. Yes. So
Okay.
LORIDROSTE.com.
Perfect. And it's number 8, like a Ward 8 or something, I think I saw. Is that right?
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
What about what per how big tell us about Berkeley. What give us the top 5 things or 3 things about Berkeley. What's the population and
So
what's special about Berkeley?
well, we have, perhaps I'm biased, but the best public institution in the land, the University of California at Berkeley. And we're a town of a little over 100,000 people.
Okay.
And we have 8 council districts and a mayor that represents the entire city.
Yeah.
We are a city manager form of government. So the city manager directs the operations of our
Yep.
city, and council
Yep.
and the mayor set the policy.
We're the
And
same. Yep.
it's a wonderful, walkable place. It's a diverse community, and I've lived here now for, geez, well over 20 years.
Wow, that's great. And so interesting. I mean, everything you've just described for Berkeley, I mean, it's almost like you're talking about Guelph, we're 140,000 people and we have right now we have 6 wards and we have 2 councillors elected per ward. So we have 12 councillors. They're
Oh.
considered part-time, and then me as the mayor is full-time, elected
Mhm.
across the city. And then we also have a CAO, like a city manager, like you. That's the only person that we hire or fire that is then in charge of the entire administration. So very similar. You have Berkeley as an institution. We have the University of Guelph as
Mhm.
an institution here as well, a friendly and walkable city. We're doing the same stuff here as well. And I think it was pretty interesting when I reached out to you to see if you would be willing to have a little chat. And I, introduced myself. Hey, I'm the mayor of Guelph. I wouldn't mind chat. When you responded, you said, actually, one of my best friends is from Guelph.
It's true. He then went to the graduate school in Berkeley. So, yeah, small world.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like about Berkeley, but I can tell you, I can attest for me, Guelph is like the center of the universe, it seems. Like no matter where I go, someone's always like, oh yeah, Guelph, my friend, my family, I used to live there or whatever, something about Guelph. So it was very funny when you said one of your best friends was from here, and here was this random mayor reaching out to you from a different country. Well, as I said off the top, I was inspired by some of the stuff that I saw related to you, and I'll get right into it. That was about, I think it was parking
Mhm.
minimums or no minimums, or however you can explain it. And it's something that it's been in conversation, let's put it that way, in Guelph. No
Mhm.
policy, but we are, from a staff and a public and a council position, we are engaging on that issue. And from some of the research I did before, here we are talking, it looks like you've been actually really advocating for this for quite a few years and really, again, I hope I'm describing this right, but really brought a lot of council members and community kind of drag them with you to then have this vote just a little while ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Am I right? Or
Yeah, it's just about two weeks ago. Yeah.
yeah, how about you tell us what you did 2 weeks ago, and then after that, tell us how did you get there? How did you
Okay.
get to that result?
Gosh, oh, I can tell you a long story, but essentially, a couple of weeks ago, we eliminated off-street parking minimums in all projects except for our very high hazard fire areas. So in Berkeley, we have a certain section of our city that has very narrow, tiny, winding roads.
Oh, okay.
So we eliminated parking minimums for all new projects except in those areas. But if people don't want parking, they don't have to have parking. Okay, so
Okay.
and I can walk through that, but
So
essentially,
let me jump in on a question then.
sure.
So you have let's say an infill or intensification, project, right?
Hmm.
I hope I'm saying this right for you so far. A
Yep.
developer wants to build a 10-story building or an 8-story building,
Hmm.
and let's say it's zoned for that. It's zoned to allow that.
Hmm.
But of course, there would be then all the parking requirements that come with that.
That's right.
What you did is say you don't need to worry about that anymore.
Got rid of it. Um,
Wow.
and so that's getting rid of the parking minimums. Now, I think what people misunderstand is that they think that we banned parking altogether, when in fact we banned a mandate that some people just maybe wouldn't want to use, right? So
Yeah.
we we also instituted parking maximums. So we uh, we said that we're going to implement parking maximums of zero point 0.5 spaces per unit for projects over two or more units within a quarter mile of transit. So
Okay. So
if
you had it. So I'm sorry to jump in, but
it's okay.
that's important. I think a lot of cities are thinking about this from a planning perspective, that if it is close to transit corridors, central transit stations, that they really do look to this type of policy, because they do want to encourage people to be using public transit and other forms of active transportation, things like that, that are in those areas.
Right. So we're saying that, you we're not going to give you one to one, right? If you want to build a 100 unit project, we're not going to let you build 100 parking spaces, but you could build 50. And so that would be the max, but you could
Okay.
also, if you could have a car free project if you wanted. Now, we said that we weren't going to institute any parking maximums again in the hillside overlay. If people needed parking and they
Sure.
wanted to park off the roads, then we're going to allow that.
Hmm.
So, and then the third really big part of it is we instituted transportation demand measures. So we had bike parking, unbundled parking, real-time transit displays in lobbies of those bigger buildings, and
Okay.
transit passes. And so what we found is, and how I think council and the community has moved along over the years, is they've really seen, what leads to climate change, right?
Hmm.
And how we address these issues of improving walkability and pleasant space in our community.
Hmm.
And all the research shows that parking minimums are not the way to do it. It's a huge revenue loss for the cities. It's an affordability loss, and it contributes to climate change. So we felt
Yeah.
confident in moving forward with this really best practices policy.
Interesting. Now, how, because I also saw you're a really big advocate for housing affordability, and thank you for being an elected official that does that, by the way. That's a personal thing for me. Thank you for being that way. Uh, how are you tying the sort of parking issue into affordability?
So, well, first of all, a lot of people don't realize how expensive one parking space is, particularly in
Yeah.
California. It's very high housing costs. It costs anywhere from $50,000 per space
Yeah. Yeah.
to all, in some places up to $100,000, depending on if it's a substructure.
Yes, that's
So
right.
that translates into rents. There's been ample evidence to show how those costs are then passed on to
Yeah.
renters.
Yeah.
So, when I initially put this forward, there was this mindset saying, okay, well, we can get rid of parking, but if we're going to essentially give a developer this gift, you have to give us something in return. And
Yes.
and smartly, thinking has changed a little bit now, because if we have, and knowing that parking leads to induced demand, it increases greenhouse gas emissions. We have a climate scientist at Berkeley that studied this immensely. If we're making it so unaffordable that people have to live 50 miles away,
Yeah. Yeah.
then we should flip that on its head. So, right, we wouldn't say, oh, you can get rid of your asbestos if you give us something,
Okay. Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're saying is, if you want more parking, we're going to tell you that we're not going to have any mandates, but if you would like to build parking, then that's where we can, try to get money for community benefits. But we're not going to automatically give it to you, right? We're
Sure.
not going to require you to build something that you maybe not don't want and won't use and is bad for the environment. But if you're saying, okay, well, it's really important to us that we have more parking spaces, underneath the maximum amount, then okay, well then we can talk about that sort of extraction that is a sort of a popular concept.
Interesting. So this just happened a couple of weeks ago, as you said. It was a little bit of a poll over the last few years to get people there. Was it a unanimous vote?
I mean, unbelievably, yes.
It was.
It was.
Wow.
It
That's
was.
great. That's
I,
great.
I think people didn't want, there were some legitimate concerns around, sort of really minor issues, but I think people realized they didn't want to be on the wrong side of history.
Sure. Sure.
This is a climate issue, and so we pride ourselves on being a very
Yep.
progressive
Understandable.
thinking
Yep.
community, and so we were able to get all the votes.
And so what's the feedback been since? I mean, you of course have your council colleagues and the mayor, unanimous vote. What's the kind of public? Because you and I probably are in the same boat here. It's often that there's all this public engagement and all this work, and then we have public open houses, and then we make a vote, and you don't hear from anybody, and then all of a sudden you make a decision, and it's like, oh, what the heck's going on here, So
Where
what's
was
the
this engagement?
yeah, yeah. Why didn't you engage with me? Even there was like 4 years of engagement.
Yeah,
So
five,
oh, was there?
five
Okay.
and a half years. So, it's surprisingly people were overwhelmingly supportive, and I think
Okay.
that just sort of, we're seeing more younger people come to our meetings because they are really crunched by our housing crisis,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so they're
yeah,
very vocal, and so that's
yeah.
really nice, honestly.
It
But
is.
we heard some feedback of people being concerned around banning parking, and so it's just really correcting people's
Yeah,
misunderstanding.
yeah,
So and then the other piece that I've always said over the past few years, which is hard for people to wrap their minds around, is that parking supply does not often equate to parking availability, right? So if you price your parking, so I'm talking also on-street parking. If you
yeah,
price your parking or design your parking in a way that is smart and takes into account the demand for it, parking availability is not an enormous issue, right? So
sure.
see that with Donald Shoup's books and talking about dynamic pricing, but it just, if you build parking, really what people don't understand, that means you're creating more traffic in your street, more pollution, and it's not necessarily guaranteeing you spaces.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's
Yeah.
it's been an educational campaign as well. And so a
Hmm.
lot of the concerns that we heard, I was able to email back and say, well, hold on,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
exactly what we're doing. And, it's good for business. That's another thing that is a common misconception, is that, you see when you create more walkable spaces, you see foot traffic go up, retail thrive. So, it's been a real educational process.
yeah. That's great.
Gotten a
May
lot.
I ask? May I ask? Do you charge for on-street parking everywhere in your city?
Not everywhere, not everywhere. And we had a piece of this legislation that's around residential parking permits that we are
Yeah.
asking our city staff and city attorney to look through, because there's been a
Okay.
lot of laws passed with the state. And so we
Okay.
want to make sure that we're aligned with that. But in many areas, we do have, you have to pay to have a permit,
Yeah, okay.
a yearly permit, or of course we have meters as well, and garages.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And then you good segue from the paying part. I was just going to ask you about technology. Do you have a lot of technology implemented from a viewpoint of on-demand dynamic costing, depending on the time of day use and things like that, on apps on your phones for the downtown core? Do you have all that kind of technology there?
We certainly have dynamic pricing, and we found once we instituted it that we were seeing, more parking spaces become available. So
Okay.
that was a really exciting parking program we instituted several years ago. We haven't quite, I don't think I know we passed legislation around the app, which I love, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's widespread in Berkeley yet. So,
Okay. Okay.
but certainly we've engaged with dynamic pricing.
So my last question just before I let you go then is, several years of pulling it to the point of where it was passed unanimously, a little bit of feedback as you described. What are the next steps then? Did council, request or direct staff to do a review, to come back in a year with like a report? Like, how are you going to kind of measure the successes of this new policy?
Well, we asked particularly with the transportation demand measures for staff to come back to us with a report and make sure we're engaging our transportation commission. So it's an iterative process, right? So that's
Sure.
just a piece of policy making. We want to make sure that we have it right. And given that we were one of the first cities to pass this legislation, we are
Hmm.
more other cities now have implemented it before we have. So we're seeing some other good examples from other cities. So I don't anticipate any big problems, but of course we want to have feedback and make sure
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
process is going well.
And lastly, on the feedback loop, did you have developers from the private sector and businesses also say, now that this is passed, yes, we're going to be building here or building there in the future, and yes, it will not have that parking there, and then it will reduce costs. Like, have you had some sort of at least promises from the private sector and developers that they're going to be looking to building new developments with this new policy in mind, and then transfer some of that savings into the cost of the units and whatnot?
In terms of specific projects, no, I haven't heard
'Cause
that.
it's so fresh, so I understand. Like, it's only a
Yeah,
couple of weeks. Yeah.
but I think anyone who is paying an arm and a leg for a bunch of parking for car-free students next to the campus, they're
Yeah.
thrilled about this, right?
Yeah.
And but what we have heard is from those small time mom and pop or mom and mom
Yeah. Shops. Yeah.
developers
Yeah. Yeah.
of the missing middle housing. So like
Oh, okay.
quadplexes,
From a
because
housing perspective. Okay.
the ones that you get sort of the small time ones who want to build quadplexes or maybe even a tiny apartment building, those parking requirements make it virtually unfeasible, right? If you think
Oh, okay.
about a one-to-one, how are you going to create a fourplex apartment building and embed four parking spaces in the structure? It's virtually impossible. So
Yeah. Okay.
they're really excited, and they think that can really translate into more affordable living situations for people as well.
And most of that development would be an infill, which would be near existing amenities and public transportation, and it increases the walkability and all those types of advantages too, right? So that's
Yes,
great.
absolutely.
Lori, I
Mhm.
really appreciate your time. I mean, wonderful to meet you. And just so everyone knows, we didn't didn't pass questions or anything back and forth between this moment right now that we're just chatting. And so, yeah, you're just very inspirational, as I said at the beginning. And I think what you're doing is really at the forefront. And it was so very nice to meet you in this way. I don't know who your friend is from Guelph, but if they're in Berkeley now, you said, right?
My friend has since moved to another state, but yes, I'll make sure to tell her.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, a little bit of a Guelph connection there
Yeah.
still. And if for some reason you are ever up this way, or if I'm ever down that way, I'm for certain gonna look you up and I'd love to meet you, especially after COVID, it'd be nice to if I meet people and have an actual coffee face to face. And I wish
Yes.
you all the best with your continued advocacy on these issues. And as I said at the beginning, we're going through some of these things here in Guelph, and it's just good to have the conversations about it. And we're not here to solve everything right now, especially on the Guelph side of things, but we're in the middle of these types of conversations, and it's good to get a perspective from someone else that might be just a little bit further down the road on these issues. So thank you. And again,
My
if you
pleasure.
want people want to reach out to you, your website is yourname.com. And then on social media, where I found you on Twitter,
Yeah,
what is your Twitter? I think it's just your name, isn't it?
it's my name. Yeah. So Lori Droste, Loridroste, on Twitter.
Great. And please, thank you again. And we'll say goodbye from there. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.